Thank you, Konstantin, and thank you for having me at this Verona conference. Thank you also for having noticed, Konstantin, the buses running on natural gas in Verona. This is a very interesting feature, and we will talk about this in a second, about what we can do with natural gas. I would step back and really elaborate on what Leonid and Ulrich were saying before, and give a global perspective to 2035 on primary energy consumption. I think all estimates agree with very limited discrepancies that at a global level in 2035, there should be about a quarter of primary energy coming from coal, a quarter coming from oil, and a quarter coming from gas, with gas increasing and coal and oil slightly decreasing in relative terms. And the remaining quarter coming more or less evenly split between hydro, nuclear, and renewables. This picture clearly shows what is referred to as the century of natural gas at a global level. We've seen on previous slides the very important growth estimates for Asia, for North America, for Africa, for India. The key element of change in this chart is really China. There is very few converging estimates on what China will consume. China can swing easily this chart in favor of gas compared to coal, or quite at the opposite. It could foster an endurance of coal in this picture. The key message here is that renewables are growing faster than anything else, but are starting from such a small base, if we exclude the older hydro, that if we really care about CO2 and implementing the protocols and agreements signed in Paris, and this is my favorite statistic, every percentage change in the mix between coal and gas has the same CO2 benefit as increasing the entire renewable portfolio by 15%. And the maths behind this is quite straightforward. So renewables are great. We agree with Vladimir that there will need to be better technologies and accumulation. We should invest in renewable research rather than renewable deployment with current technologies. But the global picture simply means that we should push for more gas and less coal at the global level if we really care about fighting climate change. Moving to Europe, it's very hard to pick a number in the very wide estimates for European demand. European demand is driven by policies. We have seen how the 2020 policy has allowed renewables to grow faster and to a higher level than was planned by policymakers. We would pick a guess where gas demand, at least until 2020, 2030, is flattish. I think the key message is that even with the flat demand, you still need to grow absolute imports by around 40%. 40% increase in absolute imports means tens of billions of euros of new infrastructure that is simply not being built right now. But what I find even more interesting is that regardless of the absolute imports that need to increase, the relative imports and the relative flows within Europe will be changing quite dramatically. We all know that the North Sea is declining very rapidly. We all know that production in Holland, Germany, Italy, Poland is declining fast. The hope of a European shale gas industry has quickly faded. There's some uncertainty around additional volumes from North Africa available for Europe. There is some uncertainty around LNG that will certainly increase, but the big question, again, is around China and how much LNG will go to Asia. So inevitably, there will need to be new and more infrastructure from Russia, but even more and newer infrastructure coming from the southeast and from a new corridor that has to be inevitably built between Europe, between Greece and Italy as two southern hubs to accommodate for new Russian gas routes, as well as additional routes coming from either the Caspian and or the Middle East. At the same time, Europe should really get its act together and form the energy union, which is easier than it sounds. It's really down to 4 or 5 key projects that have been on the drawing board for too many years. We are talking about the dots that you see on the left having to disappear. These are very simple to resolve bottlenecks that are preventing our 27 markets to really becoming one market. The main bottlenecks are between Spain and France. Another bottleneck that likely, and we as SNAM have addressed, it will be completed by 2018, will be the reverse flow to be able to export gas out of Italy. The other bottleneck is to allow Greece and Bulgaria to be interconnected. But with 4 or 5 key projects, we will create the energy union. The energy union is good news for anyone supplying gas into Europe, because it will mean a bigger market, a more interconnected market, an easier market with clearer rules. I think we're halfway there. I think the effort is important. We need coordination and focus, but it's something that if we work well, we can achieve in the not too distant future. Coming to the stress tests. You may know that in a similar fashion to the banking industry, also the gas industry was subjected to stress tests to see what would happen in the case of the biggest supplier missing. Italy here is in a very privileged position. Italy is the most diversified pipeline gas market in the world. It has 7 different direct physical access to Algeria, Libya, Norway, Russia, Holland, the UK, and it will soon have a connection into Greece, Albania, Greece, and Turkey, and all the way to Azerbaijan, so it will actually go from 7 to 8. The key challenge is to make the rest of Europe also maybe not dark blue, but at least light blue, so that there is more ability to move gas around Europe. I would now conclude with one element of why we are optimistic about growth in gas. The problem affecting pollution is not only linked to CO2, but is very much also linked to the particles, the PM10s as we call them. You see in this chart the comparison between a natural gas car and a natural gas bus would have the same numbers. In terms of reduction of CO2, it's 30%. In terms of reduction of the really unhealthy particles that are creating the pollution in the cities, it's down to 90%. So a gas car has 90% less pollutants than a diesel car. At this point in time, you have countries and cities like London and Paris talking openly about banning diesel from the center, which is probably good news for the pollution, bad news for the logistics. Natural gas is ready today to provide the clean alternative. But this is not an alternative to electric cars, which should develop and will develop and have their own markets. This is really an alternative to diesel, where you can provide the same performance with about half the costs and with basically 0 emissions. So we in Italy are very privileged to have the biggest natural gas fleet in the world. We have close to 1 million vehicles on the road right now. SNAM has signed a protocol with Iveco and FCA, and others are joining soon, in order that we can build more refueling stations going from the current 1,000 to about 2,500. This is an effort to solve the chicken and egg problem, so people don't buy a gas car because there's no fueling station. People don't build a fueling station because there's not enough cars on the road. So this is really a team effort, a concentrated effort. The government in Italy is supporting with a new directive on alternative fuels. We think this is an example, and a lot of our European partners are calling us and trying to emulate this. We need to build corridors also for mini LNG for trucks. We need to build harbors for mini LNG for ships. Every new ship that is built right now is being built with an engine capable of running on fuel oil as well as on natural gas, because ship owners and shipbuilders understand that legislation in the Mediterranean will follow some of the US legislation, become more and more strict on pollutants, and so they will need to run on natural gas. It's up to us in terms of infrastructure to build those harbors, build those storages, build those LNG corridors to make this happen. So I want to close on this optimistic note. I think demand in Europe is likely to grow, fueled by reduction in coal that policymakers should really address. I also think there's new uses for gas in transport. Biomethane is another positive element that can make transport even greener. Thank you very much.